Keith Jones, I'm an independent historian. I'm a corporate marketing executive who 20 years ago followed my passion, which was American history. And my fourth book now is out, which is the seminal biography of obscure founding father John Laurance. I had never heard about Laurance, and I thought I knew virtually everything about the country's founding. But being a direct descendant of Chief Justice John Marshall, when I was researching Marshall's military history for my last book, I came across John Laurance at Valley Forge. Now, Laurance was the Judge Advocate General of the Army, and he needed help during the privation of the winter, and he brought on Marshall as Deputy Judge Advocate, which was really Marshall's entree into the legal career that ended up on the Supreme Court. So I decided to investigate this guy, John Laurance, and stumbled upon probably the best kept secret of the American founding era. John Laurance is both an enigma and a well-kept secret. His resume is astounding, and what caught my eye first is that John Laurance is the only foreign-born citizen ever to rise within 2 heartbeats of the American presidency. In 1798, he was elected Senate President pro tempore, which stood right behind Vice President in line of succession. Now, interestingly, 91 men and 1 woman, Nancy Pelosi, have stood 2 heartbeats from the presidency since 1792, but only 1 was foreign-born, and that was Laurance. Now, you could win trivia questions in a bar with a "Who was John Laurance?" But his real resume is even more astounding. He was the battlefield father of the Judge Advocate Corps for the Continental Army during the Revolution. George Washington's chief military lawyer established the Judge Advocate Corps in the field and prosecuted Benedict Arnold, prosecuted Charles Lee out of the Army, and prosecuted to the gallows Arnold's British spy mate, Major John Andre. That plus 400 personal court-martials really embedded the Articles of War into America's first professional army. And so Laurance deserves recognition for nothing more as doing that. But his resume goes on. He spoke for New York in Confederation Congress, in the United States Congress, in both houses of the state legislature, and ultimately as New York's federal district judge for the city and the district of New York. He was a senator for New York during quasi-war with France, and in fact brought the frigate New York into being in one of the early pork barrel politic ventures of the day. Beyond that, he was Alexander Hamilton's 30-year intimate close friend and political ally. Imagine yourself at the first Federal Congress, where Laurance and James Madison were the key voices. Madison for strict constructionism, Laurance for loose constructionism. Imagine yourself, there are 94 men, all men in those days. There was no president yet. There was no federal judiciary. It hadn't been formed yet. We were bankrupt. The treasury was empty. France, Spain, Holland, all clamoring for debts to be repaid. We had no navy. Our standing army was 804 men. We were in debt with no revenues. This is what faced the first Federal Congress, creating a country, creating an administrative system when all they had in their hand was a paper constitution. So for his role in that first Federal Congress, in giving us revenue bills, in giving us a sinking fund to pay off the national debt, in creating a uniform coinage system, in establishing a national bank, in paying off the foreign loans, in establishing a sinking fund to amortize the loans, to create military branches of service, to create a cabinet for an inaugurated president. Laurance was one of the key players for that, and he deserves to be remembered en masse with a half a dozen other key leaders of that very important first session. Laurance, I call him the antidote to great man theory, because what he stands for is a legacy not of a handful of great men, but of a generation of patriots who produced rule of law. And that shouldn't be lost as we revere, and we rightfully revere the great men from Washington on down. Washington's army was 230,000 men and 14,000 officers. The founders of the Constitution, the framers, were 55 strong. The Declaration of Independence was signed by 56 men. There were 343 members of Continental and Confederated Congress. There were 94 members of the first Federated Congress. It was a generation of founders, not a handful of great men. And Lawrence's career, 25 years of life in the law, points that up. Lawrence's 25-year commitment to public service was an investment in rule of law and the checks and balances that accompanied the Constitution. It wasn't about great men. It was about collaborative generation of patriots working to establish rule of law. And when you think about it, it's not a handful of founding fathers that is our true founding legacy, but rather the rule of law that emanated from the Constitution, which is a topic for conversation these days.